Alrighty, hello everyone and welcome to tonight's event. I'm the programs coordinator here at Rockland Public Library. We are so thrilled to be hosting tonight's event. First off, for Zoom, who must be that camera there because that's the one pointing at me, welcome. Please keep your cameras and microphones off for the duration of the event. If you have any comments to put in chat, you're welcome to type them into the chat throughout. And if for some reason this microphone or any of the microphones go funky again, just type it into the chat and we'll try to fix it as quick as we can. Thank you so much for joining. For those of us in person, also welcome. First off, I'm going to list off the next couple events coming up at the library. Next Thursday on October 26th at 6:30, we're going to be hosting a poetry reading by AIDS activist Robert Carr, along with several co-sponsors, including the Malay House, who are doing a program with him that afternoon beforehand. He's going to be reading from his brand new book of poetry, The Heavy of Human Clouds, and it should be a really, really wonderful event. So please join us for that here in the community room or via Zoom. Then next Thursday after that, November 2nd at 6:30 p.m., also here in the community room or via Zoom, we're going to be hosting our first Camden Conference community event of the season with lawyer Jennifer Atkinson, and her talk is titled Indian Immigration to the U.S., A Maine Lawyer's Perspective. And she's going to be talking about how Indian migration to the U.S. is shaped by federal immigration law. She'll highlight resulting population patterns and trends, and she will discuss this growth from a Maine perspective. And she is really wonderful, so that should be a really great talk as well. So I think that is just about it for me. Thank you so much again to everyone for joining. And I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker, who you may know. Her name is Patty King. She is the deputy director here at Rockland Public Library. She has been fascinated by gravestones and cemeteries for as long as she can remember. She has an undergraduate degree in English Lit from the University of Maine at Farmington and a master's of library and information science from the University of South Carolina. And she has worked in the field of librarianship for the past 27 years. So a very warm welcome to Patty King.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for being here. So why epitaphs? Why songs? I feel like I have to put together some pieces before we actually sing the songs. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story and, how we got here. But first, I'm going to clear the screen. So my childhood home, where my family still lives today, is located across from the funeral home in Searsport. Our next door neighbors were the funeral director and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Robbins. And we were also friends with Margaret Merrithew, who was the old lady who lived in the apartment over the funeral home. Because of Margaret, as a child, before I actually knew what death is, I associated it with vibrant flowers, which were often carnations, and bright ribbons noting dearest mother or father or beloved one. And that was because Margaret, in her kindness, she would sometimes give us the flowers and the ribbons that families left behind during the funerals, because she was a Yankee woman and she did not want to let those go to waste. We never asked Mr. Robbins what actually happened in the funeral home, though. We kind of left that as a question mark. My brother and I did, though, one day. We grew up in a house that has a big gully behind it, and we shared the gully with the Robbins. And my brother and I used to go digging for things in that gully and playing in the stream. And one day, we did actually find a gravestone in that gully. I imagine that it was just a sample gravestone, though, that Mr. Robbins had received, and that there was actually nobody buried in the gully. The picture you see here on the screen, this is a painting that was in my grandparents' den in Falmouth, Maine. This is a 1957 painting by Maine artist Michael Willis. Michael Willis was one of my aunt's art instructors in art school. And you can see the man in the foreground searching a cemetery by lantern light. And then there's a dark figure in the distance also holding a lantern. One might guess that these are people who work in the cemetery. My grandfather used to tell us that they were searching for a cow that fell into a grave. And I actually later learned that this was something that did occasionally happen. And my great great grandfather, Edwin Moore, who was a newspaper columnist, he had actually recounted this in his Portland Press Herald newspaper column about life in Maine in the 1800s, all in a lifetime. My grandparents' house at 5 Merrill Road was filled with objects and photos from both the Moore and Libby families, and my Grampy Bill was always willing and ready to share their histories, and through recounting them, he made the dusty past to become a living, breathing entity for me as a little girl. He was a natural born storyteller and a master of words. When we visited my other grandparents, my mom, my dad's parents in Bath, Maine, we would go on trips to Oak Grove Cemetery. It's a beautiful cemetery in Bath, and it seemed like these trips were a regular occurrence when we visited. Oak Grove Cemetery is situated on 40 acres, and there's the pond that you see here is right at the front of the cemetery at the bottom of a hill. And we would go there and we would take walks, and my grandparents would have us visit the family stones and tell us about who was who in the family, giving us connection to our roots. And we would wander throughout that place. These are my great grandparents, Francis and Eulalia. There's stones that I visited 3 years ago. The people in the next slide are not my grandparents, but they're my parents. And this is us visiting my grandparents, of whom I just spoke, their gravestone. So we would walk around, and there were monuments and mausoleums and gravestones, big and small, and trees and nature and so much space. A couple of my favorite monuments, which I did not take these pictures, but were, this is a giant tree stump. This is about 20 feet tall, and this is in the cemetery in Bath, and it memorializes Captain Benjamin Wyman Morse. And if you know anything about Bath, the high school is named Morse High School. And then the other grave that really stuck out for me was the grave of Emma Eames. She was a famous opera singer. Her stone was large and flat, and there were intricate carvings, including there's a tree that you see here that's on a barren rock with the branches reaching out. But I also loved, if you can see there, the musical instruments that are all throughout the side. So, and of course, there were many, many epitaphs there as well. As a little girl, I did not pay attention to those. I was more interested in the giant monuments and the decorations on the stones. But when I was a teenager, my mother and I would walk around the cemetery. My mom had a little tiny notebook, and she would always have a pen and paper, and we would walk around the cemetery and look for especially interesting or poetic epitaphs, and my mom would write them down in that notebook. We didn't actually write down whose gravestone it was or what their vital dates were. It was more interesting to see the written word. We also like to write down quirky hair salon names in that notebook, but that is a different story. So other things to kind of tie the pieces together and put the puzzle together. I, as Em let you know, I was an English literature major. I am a librarian. I love reading. I love words. And so therefore I was drawn to epitaphs because of that. Also, music has been a giant part of my life for as long as I know. I've either been singing or I've been listening to music as a child. We probably all did this, but I used to record myself. I would make up songs, and I fancied that I would be a famous singer one day. And then also I grew up in a congregational church, which had an amazingly gorgeous pipe organ and Searsport, and I would just sit in church and belt out hymns along with my father, who really can't carry a tune, but I always said, Dad, keep singing, let your voice shine. So those are parts of the connections and putting together the puzzle. And so we're going to fast forward from my childhood, though, to an evening, a Saturday night about 8 or 9 years ago. What do you do when you're home alone and you're thinking about your family and you're thinking about visiting cemeteries? You Google epitaphs, of course, why not? So I went to Google and I found an article from the New England Historical Society that had an epitaph for Roswell Stowell, who died December 2nd, 1875, and he was age 60, and he died in Chesterfield, New Hampshire. And his epitaph reads, "Let no one stand behind my grave, now that I am called to rest, nor shed a tear that I am gone, for what I need is rest. Rest from the weary load of care, rest from the wearing pain. For death shall ever be to me an everlasting gain. I know the road was bright and fair, or once it seemed to be, but it has changed so much of late, it has few charms for me." So I read this epitaph and I read it again and I read it again and I read it again. And then in my head, I started to sing a song and I felt the musicality and the poetry of this piece. And then I recorded it. So that was kind of the initial epitaph song. And you won't hear me sing this tonight because I have not finished it. So, but this is kind of where my journey with epitaphs and singing epitaphs began. Once again, before we sing, I want to talk to you a little bit about epitaphs. So the history of epitaphs can be traced back to ancient Egypt and Greece. Interestingly enough, the Sekilos epitaph, I may be pronouncing this incorrectly, which was found in Turkey in 1883, but created in the 1st or 2nd century, is not only an epitaph, but it's the oldest complete music composition. So there's a connection there. And that epitaph reads, in English translated, I will not read it in Greek. "While you live, shine, have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time, with a capital T, demands his due." In early America, epitaphs often served as warnings about the inevitability of death and decay and the promise of eternal life, but only if one led a prayerful life. One of those epitaphs that some of you might know was pretty common in colonial America is, "Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me." And I saw you in the audience mouthing that. That is definitely one that is common. And there's one in the Camden Mountain View Cemetery that I don't remember the entire one, but it talks about the greedy worms feeding on the person's body. So some epitaphs were not very happy, but then if you think about that time and you think about the dominance of religion in people's lives and the strictness of it, that's, the epitaphs reflected that society. But by the 1800s, maybe the mid 1800s, many epitaphs were focusing more on eternal peace and meeting again in heaven. Sounds a lot more pleasant than greedy worms, for sure. So where do epitaphs come from? They have myriad sources. They come from scripture, they come from hymns and psalms and poetry, but to name a few. And how did they make it onto gravestones? And how did people from long ago, access this information? So many households in the 1800s and even in the 1700s would have included a book or two, definitely a Bible, and perhaps an almanac or poetry anthology. And then ministers would often have more extensive libraries. And then at that time, there were also lending libraries. And newspapers were widespread, and magazines, and those would come into households with traveling salespeople. And what I find interesting about that time is that many newspapers of the time contained stories, and they contained poetry. In a lot of the research that I do here at the library, you see poetry on the front page, and you see serialized stories on the front page of the paper as well. Can you imagine that in the newspapers today? And also in the 1800s, something that I didn't see in the research that I did, but I think this could have been sources, scrapbooking was a popular pastime, and many times the collections included newspaper clippings, and you imagine that it might have included some of the poetry that they found there. John Hanson, who is the author of Reading the Gravestones of Old New England, wondered, as I do, whether or not stone carvers also had a portfolio or book of common and beloved epitaphs from which a family could select a favorite. And as so far, he has been unable to find such a collection. If you're interested in the sources of epitaphs on Old New England gravestones, though, I highly recommend his book because it's an incredible resource. I found a kindred spirit in him. He is a fellow cemetery wanderer, an epitaph collector, and a seeker of those sources. And he too had walked through cemeteries with his family as a child. And if you're interested in epitaphs, you need to know you're not alone in collecting them or being interested. There are multiple epitaph anthologies out there. It was a thing that people did. Over their dead bodies, and granite laughter and marble tears are a few that I've read. And Robert Pike says in his preface of Granite Laughter, to stop along the highways or the back roads for the purpose of knowing forgotten people by their epitaphs is a popular pastime. So for this project, the past 8 years or so, I've wandered through cemeteries taking photos. You saw some of them there. Those photos were in Maine and Vermont and Arizona and Newfoundland and New York City that you saw there. And I take many, many photos, not just of epitaphs, because I think gravestone artistry is beautiful. That's a whole other topic. And then some of the cemeteries themselves, many of them are so lovely. So sometimes though, when I'm walking through, I pause before a gravestone where the words call out to me. And I read and I reread them, and I hum a melody to the words, and then I sing a song, and then I record myself on my cell phone or sometimes on my camera. And you need to know that not all of the epitaphs actually become songs. It has to be just right, and I can't explain what is just right about it. Perhaps it's the meter and the rhyme, if you want to be technical. But so when you have a project like that, your family and your friends will inevitably find out about this. And so my friend Lisa and my Aunt Susie have both taken me on cemetery road trips. My Aunt Susie took me to the wilds of Western Maine, and my friend Lisa in the Wiscasset, Alna area. And you'll hear a few songs from those areas a little bit later on. And when I travel near or far, I love to visit cemeteries. My friend Peter, who's right here, can say that I really do, and that he's been dragged into cemeteries, and I think he's come to tolerate and maybe even enjoy those stops a little bit. So then I thought to myself, I visit cemeteries, I record these songs, what am I going to do with them? So I took piano lessons as an adult because I never learned to play an instrument. And my teacher, Sojourner Hodges Crowley, She patiently helped me notate 8 of the epitaphs. And she also said to me, and this is paraphrasing her, that she kind of thinks that perhaps people were speaking to me from the grave, and that's where these songs came from. I don't know. So I did that, and then I wasn't done, because epitaphs themselves certainly tell a story, but I wanted to know more about the people buried beneath the words in stone. And so I attempted to find out a little bit more about them, and I attempted to find a little bit more about where the words on the gravestones actually came from. So that's the project in a nutshell, which it's an ongoing project. It's a lot of work. And tonight you'll hear 10 of those songs arranged chronologically by the death date of the people buried, that are buried there. And some will have details about their subjects' lives and also the origin of the epitaph, while some will just be the song. And so we will begin with John Harkness. John Harkness is buried in Rockport, Maine. He was a native of Lunenburg, Massachusetts. He was born in June of 1750. He started off learning a shoemaker's trade in New Ipswich, New Hampshire, when he was 18. But then the Revolutionary War happened, and he enlisted in the war. He was a private, and then an ensign, and then a second lieutenant. He enlisted in 1775, and then was discharged in 1777. He took part in the battles of Bunker Hill and Ticonderoga. It was said that he was always in the thick of battle. He was in such close contact with the enemy that a tow wad of a gun lodged in his cockade hat, which would have been a decorative hat, and burned a hole in it. But war was really difficult for him, and he left, and then he was advised to go to Maine to kind of rally his strength. First, he actually stopped here in Rockland, in Lerman's Cove. And then in 1779, he came to Camden, Rockport area, and he settled at Goose River. One interesting story about him is that with a group of 20 patriots, he went to Hamden, Maine, and he ransacked a house of a Tory there. They did not like that Tory, and they stole cattle and goods. And Harkness actually took a book. He loved books. When the Federal Library opened, he, and I quote, he read day and night without sleep for a week. He was married to Elizabeth Ott of Camden. She was the daughter of Peter and Elizabeth Ott. They were German settlers, and I think many of you, if you are from this area, will recognize the Ott name. He had 6 children with his wife, Elizabeth. And in Camden, once he settled there, he didn't settle down. He served the town every year of his life as either the town clerk or selectman. He eventually succumbed to cancer, and he is buried next to his wife, Elizabeth, in the Harkness family plot. And interestingly enough, his wife survived him half a century and died November 9th, 1856, at the age of 92. For that time period, that is impressive. So if you have ever gone to the Harkness Nature Preserve in Rockport, that is named after him, in honor of him. So his epitaph reads, "Come, honest sexton, take thy spade, and let my grave be quickly made. Thou still art ready for the dead, like a kind host to make their bed. I now am come to be thy guest. In some dark lodging give me rest. For I am weary, full of pain, and of my pilgrimage complain. On heaven's decree I waiting lie, and all my wishes are to die. Come on, sexton, take thy spade, and let my grave be quickly made. Thou still art ready for the dead, like a kind host to make their bed. I am now come to be thy guest. In some dark lodging give me rest, for I am weary, full of pain, and of my pilgrimage complain. On heaven's decree I waiting lie, and all my wishes are to die. Hark, I hear my passing bell. Farewell, my loving friends, farewell. And you're wondering, where did passing bell part come from? And actually, so believe it or not, this epitaph was a song. So it started off as an anonymous poem from 1608. And a passing bell, if you don't know, is a bell sounded upon death or a death knell. And some would say that it would scare away demons as well. The musical version was composed by Matthew Locke, who was an English Baroque composer. And he wrote music for the 1653 musical, The Mask of Cupid and Death. And it's one of the most, it's the only remaining musical score from that time period. And I have not attempted to play this or had anyone sing it, but I have read that the style was march-like. I'm interested to compare the two for sure. So our next story is of Emmeline Priscilla Norwood. She's buried in the Mountain View Cemetery in Camden. She was born in 1816 in Warren, Maine. Her maiden name was Hodgman. Her father was Amos, and her mother was Priscilla. She died on April 19th, 1840 in Camden. And I couldn't find out a lot about her, as it's often true of women of a certain time. I did find out that after her death, her father, who was a clothier in Warren, was in court for debt multiple times. Her father also, as people would have that time, because people didn't live long, her father married 3 times. She herself married Winslow Norwood in 1838 in Warren. The Norwood family was quite a family in the Camden area. They were very prominent. They were merchants, they were postmasters, they were successful in sea and business. They had a shipbuilding business, a general store. They started a lime building business. And one of their children went to California to be a stockbroker. So Winslow and Emmeline, though, had one child named Eveline after our aunt. And Emmeline she died 6 months after her child's birth. And after she died, her husband and her daughter moved to Baghdad, Texas, which is actually, I believe, not a town anymore. It was a town named after Baghdad, Tennessee, that started in the late 1840s and the 1850s. And her husband died there in Texas in 1851 at the age of 42 years and 4 months. Her epitaph is, "Weep for her voice will greet no more. Weep for her brow of love is dim. Where heaven's eternal fountains pour, her spirit breathes its glorious hymn. Knowing but love's unclouded sun, Her dream of earth was bright as grief, rejoiced that when the goal she won, her crown had not a withered leaf. Her spirit breathes its glorious hymn. Knowing but love's unclouded sun, her dream of earth was bright as grief. Rejoiced that when the goal she won, her crown had not a withered leaf. So Emmeline Priscilla's epitaph, also I was able to find the source for that. It is a poem called The Early Dead, and it begins, "Too bright, too beautiful for earth, was she who gladdened every heart. The blessed sunbeam of each hearth, her light seemed of our life a part. Weep for her voice will greet no more, weep for her brow of love is dim. Where heaven's eternal fountains pour, her spirit breathes its glorious hymn." This was found all over the place. I found it in a newspaper from New York from 1833, the New England Magazine from 1833, the Godey's Lady Book from 1833, a collection called Uncle Toby's Select Tales and Poetry from American Authors. And then it was also included in a collection called A Morning Tribute to the Memory of Anna Perry, for private circulation only in her family and amongst her friends. We now turn to John Ross, who is buried in the Amesbury Hill Cemetery in Rockport, Maine. He died August 20th, 1849. He was 31 years old, 10 months and 4 days. And I don't know a lot about his life. I know that in the mortality tables of 1850 census, it said that he had died of consumption and he had been ill for 3 years. If you don't know, consumption was tuberculosis. And tuberculosis in the 19th century killed more people in New England than any other disease. People really didn't know how it happened. They didn't know how to fix it. They thought maybe it could be something in the air, but they also believed that it was because of the victim's own constitution. There was something wrong with them psychologically or physiologically. And people also, unfortunately, didn't believe it was contagious. So people suffering from the disease were not avoided. Tuberculosis is also known as a romantic disease because people were thought to have heightened sensitivity. And because it progressed slowly, it allowed for a good death, as those affected were able to, put things in order before they died. And John's epitaph is, "We think of thee at morning, and we think of thee at noon. We think of thee midsummer's night, and mid the winter's gloom. Each season is appropriate for that one cherished thought. How hard it is to name the time when you're remembered not."
Just the last two. And 1, 2, 3, 4.
We think of thee at morning, and we think of thee at noon. We think of thee Christmas night and mid the winter's gloom. Each season is appropriate for that one cherished thought. How hard it is to name the time when you're remembered not. And I was able to find a source for this one also. It is from a very lengthy poem called The Absent One. And the reference that I found it in was the Philharmonic Journal, which actually was a music journal, but it also included poetry and stories. And I'll read just a little bit more of the poem, but I'm not going to read the whole thing. We think of you at morning's dawn, and we think of you at noon. We think of you midsummer's heat and mid the winter's gloom. Each season is appropriate for that one cherished thought. How hard it were to name the time when you're remembered not. We gather round the social hearth to hear some favorite page, whose simple touching truthfulness might every thought engage. The page will lose the power to charm the auditors, though few. We cannot keep our minds to it. We'd rather think of you. And it's noted that it was written in Dublin in 1848 by an M.M., but I have yet to figure out who M.M. is. So the next story is about Henry and Lucy Midmer. Henry died on January 13th, 1852, and Lucy died on February 3rd, 1852. They were mother and son. Henry lived for 3 days, and Lucy died a little bit after that. In the New York City vital records, it was said that she died of bronchitis. They're buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. And their epitaph is, "They died in beauty like the snow, on flowers dissolved away. They died in beauty like the star, lost on the brow of day. She lives in glory like night's gems, set round the silver moon. She lives in glory like the sun, amid the blue of June." They died in beauty like the snow, on flowers dissolved away. They died in beauty like the star, lost on the brow of day. She lives in glory like night's gems, set round the silver moon. She lives in glory like the sun, amid the blue of June. And that is indeed also from a poem, and it's called She Died in Beauty, and it's by Charles Doyne Sillery. He was a poet who was Irish, but then he ended up going on to live in Scotland, and he was going to study surgery, but then became a poet instead. And he has some deeply religious works of poetry, and he also just has some other poems, and several of his poems have obtained a permanent place in Scottish anthologies. And the rest of the poem is, "She died in beauty like a rose, blown from its parent stem. She died in beauty like a pearl, dropped from some diadem. She died in beauty like a lay along a moonlit lake. She died in beauty like the song of birds amid the brake." And then it goes on to be what you see on her epitaph. And next we have Mary Celeste Batchelder. She's buried in the Common Cemetery in Union, Maine. She died May 20th, 1854. She was 16 years old and 10 months. Her stone was made by A.F. Clark of Camden. Her father, who was from New Hampshire, served in the Civil War. And her epitaph reads, "O Mary, sweet Mary, thy pure soul hath fled, and we number thee now with the sanctified dead. But we miss thee, we mourn thee, thou dear cherished one. We shall miss thee forever till life's journey's done." And I have too many pieces of paper, so we're gonna take one moment. Here.
2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
O Mary, sweet Mary, thy pure soul hath fled, and we number thee now with the sanctified dead. But we miss thee, we mourn thee, thou dear cherished one. We shall miss thee forever till life's journey's done. And Deborah Lucas, she was found on my cemetery road trip with my aunt. And this is a little cemetery. She's buried in a little cemetery in Hartford, Maine. She was the wife of Oliver Lucas. She died on June 8th, 1857. She was aged 54 and 6 months. She was born in Sumner, Maine as Deborah Cobb. Her father was Captain Timothy Cobb. Her husband was a farmer. She was the mother of 3 children. And Hartford, Maine, which when I went through there wasn't much to Hartford, Maine, but I read that in earlier days that the town supported 14 schoolhouses, and they had 14 schoolhouses, but their population was only 863, which is pretty impressive. And Deborah's epitaph reads, "Hail, hail, all hail, ye blood-washed throng. Saved by grace, I've come to join your rapturous song. Saved by grace, all is peace and joy divine. And heaven and glory now art mine, forever with the blessed to shine. All is well, all is well." Sorry. Let's go.
Anytime.
You can start at the beginning
Do it
again.
again?
Yeah. And I'll sing out.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hail, hail, all hail, ye blood-washed throng. Saved by grace, I've come to join your rapturous song. Saved by grace, all is peace and joy divine. And heaven and glory now art mine, forever with the blessed to shine. All is well, all is well. And heaven and glory now art mine, forever with the blessed to shine. All is well, all is well. You may or may not have guessed this, but this was actually a song. This All Is Well is a shape note gospel song, and it was in the Sacred Harp by J.T. White in 1844. And it also was in the American Vocalist in 1848 with a different tune arrangement. We're going to take a moment and we're going to, if hopefully you can kind of see the first verse there. It's interesting, all of the shape note versions of that I found of this is the last verse of the song, and nobody ever seemed to want to hail the blood-washed throng. They ended the song before then. So one moment, and we're gonna have to do a little changing because this is gonna.
Maybe she always wanted to hear it, and she never did.
Our next epitaph takes us to Pittston, Maine, and this was found on my little cemetery field trip with my friend Lisa, and it's the gravestone of G.W. Partridge, or George Partridge. George was born in Somerville, Maine. He died at the age of 21. He was in the Civil War, and he enlisted on September 9th, 1861. This isn't from his area, but this is from Belfast, and it's the same year. So he may have seen something like this. He was in the 8th Maine Regiment, and he may have seen this and thought, you know, I want to serve my country. So he was a private in the 8th Maine Infantry Company H. This regiment was organized in Augusta, Maine on September 7th, 1861. And the new soldiers signed 3-year enlistment papers. And you'll notice that he enlisted September 9th, 1861, and it would have been his 3-year mark in September of 1864, but instead he was killed in action on near Foster's Plantation, Virginia, in May of 1864. And his epitaph reads, "Now who were the first on duty, brother, when in arms your leader cried? You have left the ranks forever, brother. You have laid your arms aside. From the awful scenes of battle, brother, you were set forever free. When your comrades left you sleeping, brother, underneath that southern tree."
One, two, three, 1, 2.
Now who were the first on duty, brother, when in arms your leader cried? You have left the ranks forever, brother, you have laid your arms aside. From the awful scenes of battle, brother, you were set forever free. When your comrades left you sleeping, brother, underneath that southern tree. There's a flag on the top. Yeah. Yep, that is a flag. And I think there's decorative ribbons on the back part of it, Sally. Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome. And so once again, it may not surprise you that this was also a song. And it is a song called Sleeping for the Flag by Henry Clay Work. Henry Clay Work was known for many Civil War songs. He wasn't as well known as Stephen Foster, but he had many famous songs. One of them, which I think was probably his most famous, is not about the Civil War. It's called My Grandfather's Clock, if anyone knows the Grandfather's Clock song. So I will read a few of the words to Sleeping for the Flag that we did not just hear. When our boys come home in triumph, brother, with the laurels they shall gain, when we go give them welcome, brother, we shall look for you in vain. We shall wait for your returning, brother, though we know it cannot be, for your comrades left you sleeping, brother, underneath that southern tree. Sleeping to waken in this weary world no more, sleeping for your true loved country, brother, sleeping for the flag you bore. You were the first on duty, brother, when to arms your leader cried. You have left the ranks forever, brother. You have laid your armies aside. From the awful scenes of battle, brother, you were set forever free. When your comrades left you sleeping, brother, underneath that southern tree. You have crossed the clouded river, brother, to the mansions of the best. When the wicked cease from troubling, brother, and the weary are at rest. Surely we would not recall you, brother, but the tears flow fast and free when we think of you sleeping, brother, underneath a southern tree. And Henry Clay Work, one other thing I wanted to say about him is that he actually worked in a printing office, and he, I believe they thought that he composed a lot of his songs to the sound of the printing machines. So, which I thought was kind of fascinating. And he was also a self-taught song composer, which I did not know. So next we have Amos Thompson and Benjamin Franklin Thompson, who died on September 15th, 1871. They're buried in the village cemetery in South Thomaston. Amos was born in Thomaston. He was the son of a sea captain, Ebenezer, and his mother was Mehetabel, which is quite an interesting name. The 1860 and 1870 census say that he is both a laborer and a day laborer. In 1870, he lived with his wife, Elizabeth, his mother, and his two children. He enlisted in the Civil War on December 28th, 1861, and was then discharged on May 5th, 1862. He was a private in the 2nd Artillery. I looked in local newspapers to see how he and his son Benjamin Franklin died on the same day, but as of yet, I've been unable to find that information. I'm really curious about that. I don't know if it was illness. I don't know if it was some other kind of tragedy. So their epitaph reads, "Dear mother, don't think of us in the tomb, for we shall not feel its dark shadows and gloom, and we shall not fear though the river be wide, for Jesus will carry us over the tide. We're going to live with the angels so fair. We'll look for you, mother, and wait for you there. Where tears do not flow and death cannot come, together we'll dwell in the beautiful home." Dear mother, don't think of us in the tomb, for we shall not feel its dark shadows and gloom, and we shall not fear though the river be wide, For Jesus will carry us over the tide. We're going to live with the angels so fair. We'll look for you, Mother, and wait for you there, where tears do not flow and death cannot come. Together we'll dwell in the beautiful home. And next we have Sarah French, who's buried in the Riverview Cemetery in Warren, Maine. Sarah was born on September 9th, 1845, and lived until June 14th, 1873. Her father was a shipwright named John. Her mother's name was Emmeline. She had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. And in the 1870 census, it said that she worked in the woolen mill in Warren. And so Warren, if you didn't know, Warren was quite a developed place. There was a shoe factory, there was a woolen mill, there was a gunpowder mill, and there also in 1874, after Sarah's death, there was a cheese factory there. And the Georges River Woolen Mill the first mill was built in 1842 and destroyed by fire in 1868. And then the second mill was built on the same site as the first on the St. George River and was in operation by February of 1869. It was fully equipped to take raw wool and process it through scouring, carding, spinning, and weaving, and it produced award-winning fabrics. And that was located, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Warren, but there's a place called Woolen Mill Park, and that's where it was located. But this is what Warren used to look like. And that large picture is the woolen mill, and you might recognize in the distance the building.
It's still there.
Right here. That's still there. Yeah. And Sarah's epitaph reads, Dearest Sarah, thou art sleeping. Thy dear face we see no more. Though for thee we now are weeping, thou art only gone before. Dearest Sarah, now with angels, happy on that radiant shore, though thy place is ever vacant, thou art only gone before.
Okay, 1, 2, 1.
Dearest Sarah, thou art sleeping. Thy dear face we see no more. Though for thee we now are weeping, thou art only gone before. Dearest Sarah, now with angels, happy on that radiant shore, though thy place is ever vacant, thou art only gone before. And next we have Izora Winchenbach, who is buried in the German Protestant Cemetery in Waldoboro, Maine. She died on January 8th, 1879 at the age of 29 and 6 months. I've yet to be able to find a lot of information about her. I hope to find out more. So what I want to share with you a little bit about is there's German Protestant Cemetery in Waldoboro. how did Waldoboro come to have German immigrants there? And I'm just going to scratch the surface of this. But Samuel Waldo had the Waldo patent, and he visited Germany and he recruited about 1,500 immigrants to come to Waldoboro, which was known at that time as the Broad Bay Plantation, and it was part of the Massachusetts colony then. So these folks were lured there by Samuel Waldo with a promise of land, funding, and freedom. So he went to Germany and he distributed leaflets that promised potential settlers 100 free acres, food and money for the first winter, farming tools, and land to build schools and churches. When they got to Waldoboro, they realized it was basically wilderness, and that he had made some pretty false claims and they had a pretty difficult time. Some of them ended up going to another state, but some of them stayed in Waldoboro. And Winchenbach is definitely a local name here still. The old German meeting house that you see in the background of the photo is a historic Lutheran church, and it was built in 1772. For us here in the United States, that's pretty old. And it was built by and for the immigrant German community, and it's one of the oldest churches in Maine. And it served as the center of the Waldoboro German community for many years, and it was a place of worship and also a community meeting house. And Izora's epitaph reads, "We miss that voice and music. We miss that lovely face. Our circle has been riven. There is a vacant space. The flowers she loved to gather above her grave shall bloom, for the hopes so fondly cherished are shrouded in the tomb."
Two, three, four.
We miss that voice and music, we miss that lovely face. Our circle has been riven, there is a vacant space. The flowers she loved to gather above her grave shall bloom, for the hopes so fondly cherished are shrouded in the tomb. The flowers she loved to gather above her grave shall bloom, for the hopes so fondly cherished are shrouded in the tomb. And that, my friends, is the end of those songs and the end of my presentation. But also, I would suggest, if you don't already visit cemeteries, to go to cemeteries and to take a look, and whether or not you're there just for a sense of peace and quiet, which this crazy world, we need places where we can have peace and quiet. If you're there to go and look at the art on the gravestones, if you're there to wonder about your community and history, and like me, just wondering about the past and the stories of the people who are buried there, you know, I invite you to go out and visit a cemetery. I'll come with you so we can all go together. So thank you for coming. And if anyone has any questions, we can go from there.
Yeah. The Civil War soldier, is that a cenotaph or is he actually there?
I do not know the answer to that. As far as I know, he actually is buried there, but I know that sometimes that would happen.
Right.
Yes.
And FYI, Amesbury Cemetery doesn't have an E in it.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Have you connected with the descendants of any of the people you've honored?
I have not done that, Marilee. That's a really interesting thought. It is. It would be another piece of the puzzle to figure out the descendants, because there are many pieces of the puzzle to try to figure out these stories and to try to figure out the
Well, you've
origins.
done an extraordinary amount of research.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marilee. Thank you. Yeah.
Have you ever used the website Find My Grave?
I certainly have. Find a Grave is a great resource, and we have some local people who are definitely taking the time to really flesh out those sites with more than just a picture of the gravestone. There are articles and stories about the people there and genealogy, etc.
Yeah.
So I have, for sure.
How did you do the research to find the origin of all these epitaphs?
So I will tell you that at this point, even though a lot of these are in books, this librarian used Google as her friend. and I am a fairly adept searcher, because searching, you kind of need to type in good search terms, and you might need to type in different lines of the epitaphs. So mostly I did use Google, and Google Books is, a really good resource as well. Yeah. Yes, Annabelle?
I enjoy cemeteries and to read and wonder about the people that were buried there. Often I'm frustrated because I can't read most of what's
Yeah.
written. Do you have any tricks for figuring out, or like do you like sometimes people do rubbings or anything like that?
So rubbings are not necessarily a good thing to do. The Maine Old Cemetery Association, of which I am not a member at this point, is a really excellent resource, because they would be able to teach you appropriate ways of cleaning stones. Sally? Yes.
Sometimes you just spray a gravestone with water, and that will make it more three-dimensional. So, you'll be able to decipher what's written, but sometimes it's very difficult. And yeah, rubbings are no longer allowed in most places. But I think
The Tramper's Guide, yeah.
also
Yeah.
enlarge it up, change the contrast of the
Yeah.
computer. A lot of times that will pull out what you're trying to see. And sometimes a mirror.
Yeah, that's what they have a page in that lists all the things in there.
Excellent. Yeah.
What is the name of that?
The Maine Old Cemetery Association, Trampers and Tramper's Guide.
There's a copy right here in the library.
Yes. I think that it, kind of is ruining kind of the foundation of the stone. Somebody else may have a more specific answer to that.
The wax would get used.
That also, yes. Yeah.
It's the wax
Yeah.
that gets impregnated into the stone, and that will destroy the stone eventually, damages it.
A lot of these stones are like sugar cubes. And so, if you were rubbing on a sugar cube,
Okay, yes, I am a member of MOCA, and I am the chair of the Maine State Cemetery Preservation Commission. Yeah, no rubbings, please. And the sugaring is the main issue. Some of the stones too are very, very fragile. We have in this area a lot of Thomaston marble, and I noticed a couple of them in your pictures. Those, in order to read some of that, it's the lighting. My DAR chapter did the preservation work at Tolman Cemetery. We're publishing a book on that. We've done all of the readings. They are more complete than is what is in those Find a Grave issues, that it took 2 or 3 readings looking at them to have the right light, just exactly right for the epitaph to show up, because on the tombstone marble, they're so lightly etched. But it's a matter of the fragility of the stone that you don't want, in some cases, don't even touch it.
Thank you.
Right, I know we had one comment on Zoom I really wanted to read. It was from Walter, who said, "This was lovely. You brought them alive, and the music had a number of different styles. Thank you so much." And thank you for that, Walter. Any other in-person questions or Zoom questions before we wrap up? Or comments? Questions or comments? Yes.
I was just wondering if you have plans for this collection, and will you issue it in the form of a CD eventually, or what are your plans?
That is a really good question. That is a very good question. I'm not sure what I want to see become of it, because there's the aspect of the songs, so involving sound, and then there's also visual things. So I don't know, creating a video. I'd love to see and hear other people singing the songs other than just me. And, you know, adding musicians, and I'd like to see it continue to grow, and I'd like to keep doing it.
It's really lovely.
Thank you. Yeah. And I just want to, speaking of thank yous, I really would love to thank Peter and Joanna, you know, really helping bring these to life, and for believing in me singing these songs, and so, and taking the time to learn them. So thank you, and doing it beautifully.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.